So yeah, who or what is God? And somebody's, as I was greeting people this morning, someone said to me, probably everybody in this room is going to have a different answer to that question. What's God? Who is God? How do we know God? How do we connect with God? And that lovely long reading that John gave us from Joshua is all about the people of Israel trying to figure it out. Through all that we go through, all the good stuff, all the good stuff, all the joys of life, all the challenges, all the hard stuff, how do we find God in the midst of it? Who is God for us? How do we make sense of all that? God's only a 3-letter word, but it has a lot of possible meanings. And yeah, if we went around the room and I asked everybody, you probably all have your own way of thinking, way of talking about who God is for you. You might think about God as the creator, the source of all life and all that's good in life. You might think about God as the beginning of all things, the being that made the Big Bang happen. Or God as a force or an energy. Or maybe, like I was playing around with the story with the kids this morning, maybe God is the whole universe. And we're kind of part of it, swimming around, walking around inside the being of God. Or maybe we like to think of God the way Jesus did, as a loving parent who wants every child to know they're beloved and precious. We might think about God as the object of our worship and devotion. The God is the being, the thing, the whatever that we pray to, offering our thanks, bringing our concerns, our worries and our hopes. God's the one we ask for help, for healing, for hope. Some of us, depending on how we were brought up, we might still have inside of us the idea that God's like a scary judge watching us with that finger, right? You were bad, you were bad. That's not my favorite image of God. Hope we can get through or past that one. Many of us draw great comfort from the image of God as always being with us, always loving us, always listening to us, giving us strength and encouragement as we need it, helping us live through each day. Lots of ideas, lots of ways of imagining God in our life, ways of trying to feel that God is with us. But I bet for all of us there are times when none of those ideas fit. None of those ideas really seem like something we can connect with. And there can be a disconnect between our ideas about God, things we've been taught about God, the Sunday school things we learned, and does God really feel real in our life? And if God doesn't really feel real in our life, how could we possibly live a life in response to God? What would that mean? So often, if you look up God in the dictionary, it'll say that it's a noun. A noun is a person, place, or thing. But what if God isn't just a noun? What if God is a verb? What if God is an action in the universe? So maybe, what if we're not called just to believe certain things, ideas, memorize some beautiful words about God, the noun, but what if we're called to actually live them out, to verb them, to bring action to God, to see God an active, working action force in the universe? What if we're called to be like God, active in the world? So, love is a noun, and love's also a verb, right? Love is the thing that gets us through our days, and we can love somebody, or we can love something. What if we could God things? What if godding was a verb? Going to do some godding today. Going to make some God happen in the universe. Bring action to God all around us. So Jesus said once, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I hear those words, And what they suggest to me is you can really tell a lot. Think about the people in your life. Think about them in a kind, loving way. Think about how the people you know invest their time. What do they do? What do they watch on TV? What do they look at on the internet? What kind of music do they listen to? What books do they read? How do they spend their money? How do they invest their life energy? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you meet somebody for the first time and all they talk about is themselves, what does that tell you? It can tell you they're not that interested in you because they find themselves really fascinating. If you meet somebody and all they talk about is Donald Trump, yeah, that's a hard thing, yeah. I just think they're never going to be happy, right? There, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. What do we do with the time we have? How do we invest our lives, our hearts, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions? How are we Godding in the world? I've been learning a lot this week about a guy named Dashrath Manjhi. And I'm probably saying his name wrong because I am. He lived from 1929 to 2007. He was born in a very poor rural village in northern India. And you know how they have the caste system in India, the levels? He came from the very lowest caste. He was from a group of landless laborers called the Musahar, who, by virtue of being born into that caste, are usually denied access to clean water, electricity, medical care, education, and nothing but the worst jobs, like daily labor, hard work. Even so, when Dashrath died in August of 2007, the local government in his area gave him a state funeral with full honors. And everybody in India heard about this guy. And at least 3 movies have been made to tell the story of his life and all of his great accomplishments. I'm hoping a slide's going to come up. There we go. That's a picture taken near the village where Dashrath lived his whole life. When he was a young man, newly married, he lived in this village called Jalore. And like all the Musahar men in his village, he would get up early in the morning, way before the sun, and he had to climb over that mountain because the place they worked was on the other side of the mountain. They had to climb over the mountain to work and till farmers' fields. And there was no road. You can see there's no easy way around that. The only way around that took about 75 kilometers to get there. So hours and hours of walking. So they would shorten the trip by going over the mountain. Now the village men, that's what it would be like, going to work every day. The village men who worked in the fields, because they went early, and they had such a long haul in the morning, by noon hour, they were really hungry. They worked hard all morning. And they relied on their wives, their daughters, their mothers, the women, right, who do all the hard work. They had to climb over the same mountain and bring lunch. That's how it was. So one day, Dashrath is waiting and waiting and waiting, and his wife, Vajuni, hasn't shown up with his lunch. And he's getting ticked. He's getting really mad. And then he's getting really worried. What's taking her so long? What happened? And she'd set out on the usual climb. She did this every day. She'd packed a lunch. She'd cooked some rotis, wrapped them up, had a small container of a thin curry, had a clay pot full of drinking water. Carrying all this, she left her children behind, and they were used to this every day. They'd be playing outside the family hut, and they knew she'd be gone for hours because she had to walk all the way up the mountain to the place where her husband was working, bring him his lunch, walk all the way back. Except this day, she was late. Dashrath, he goes from being really mad because he's hungry. You know that word hangry? He was hangry. And then something happened. he looks off in the distance and he sees her approaching. And she has nothing in her hands, so he's getting even more hangry. She doesn't have any food for him. And as she gets closer, he notices she's limping. She got even closer, and she saw not only was she limping, she was bleeding. So she had fallen. And you can see how easy that would be. She fell and slipped on some treacherous rocks and lost the rotis, lost the curry, and the clay pot full of water smashed. So she had nothing to bring to her husband. But went to see him anyway. And of course, for Dashrath, his anger, his hunger, all transformed in that moment. He went from being really, really ticked to be very, very concerned about not only his wife, but this situation. His anger turned into something else when he saw his wife's tears. And in that moment, he made a life-changing decision. And years later, he said it this way: that mountain had shattered so many pots and claimed so many lives, I could not bear that it had hurt my wife. If it took all my life now, I would carve us a road through the mountain. So, he went home that night, and he sold his goats to raise the funds to buy a hammer, chisel, some crowbars. And each day, before he went to work in the farmer's fields, he would climb up that mountain, and he would chip away at the rock for a few hours, haul away the stone, and then go to the farmer's field and put his day's work in. And then on his way home, stop and chip away some more rock. So he hardly slept. You can see there's beginning to be a cleft in the rock. Other villagers saw him doing this every day, and at first they thought he was nuts. What are you doing? You're just a Musahar. You're supposed to work and eat and die. That's your lot in life. Why would you try to be anything else than what has already been laid out for you? They thought he was losing his mind. Over time, as they could see the cleft in the rock beginning to show, he's beginning to make some progress. Years and years went by. They began to respect what he was doing. Over time, some of his fellow villagers began to donate food to help his family, help feed his kids. So eventually he quit his paying job, and instead of going over the mountain to the farmer's field every day, he spent most of his waking hours on that mountain. His wife, Fujuni, supported his efforts, understood the importance of what he was doing. Often, at the end of a hard day, she would be the one to nurse his wounds, because he got hurt all the time. Treacherous place to be, chipping away at rock with those simple tools. He'd come home, she would have to wash the wounds, bandage him up, get him set for the next day. Tragedy struck the family when Fujuni herself became very ill. And there was a doctor in the nearest town, but that was that 75-kilometer walk around the mountain or over the mountain. And she wasn't up to either. She got sicker and sicker, and she died. So now he was a widower, raising kids on his own. You think maybe he'd stop. He'd stop carving the mountain. But no, he felt even more compelled to keep doing this for her. She knew why he was doing this. He worked away on his roads. After about 10 years of digging and hammering away at the rock, villagers got really on board. They saw he's really making a dent. They began to help him more and more. Sometimes people would come up and they would haul rock away. After 22 years of breaking and hauling rock, Dashrath broke through the last thin wall and walked through to the other side of the mountain. From the middle of a 300-foot-high mountain, he'd carved a road, 360 feet long, 30 feet wide, and he reduced the walking distance from his village and 60 other villages to the town on the other side of the mountain was reduced from 75 kilometers to 5 kilometers. So the people from his village and all the other poor villages could now make the journey in a reasonable time and gain access to schools, to medical care, to clean water, to the possibility of jobs. He changed their lives.
बाबा दशरथ तमाम लोगों के लिए प्रेरणा स्रोत हो गए हैं और इसलिए इन्हें भारत रत्न से भी सम्मानित किया जाता है। तो कम है, भारत रत्न नहीं पर दुनिया का रत्न है।
So look at that. That's basically the work of one man. But he didn't stop it. Did you notice that it's still a dirt road? He wanted it to be paved. So after he finished the road, he walked from northern India to New Delhi, following the rail line, went to see the government and said, okay, this is what I've done. Now we need the road to be paved. Now we need a school and a hospital in our village. And they kind of said, good job. Way to go. And they offered him a plot of land where he could have a home for his own family, which was unheard of for people in his caste, the Musahars. He said, no, thank you. He promptly returned the land and said, well, that should be for a hospital. He says, I don't care for these awards, for fame or for money. All I want is a road, a school, and a hospital for our people. They toil so hard. This will help the women and the children. So where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This guy, that's him on a stamp that was put out about 10, 15 years ago. He was at the same time, I think, quite extraordinary if you think about what he did, but also quite ordinary, just a guy. He came from the humblest of origins, from a group of people who in his country were not expected to ever amount to anything, make any kind of impact in the world. But he did what he could do. He knew how to smash rock. He knew how to haul it away. He found his way to make a difference. And after years of effort, people got on board, started helping him. And what he did, making that road, has literally transformed the lives of thousands of people. So everybody I know has challenges, problems, aches and pains. Anyone here have no aches and pains? Good. If you don't have any aches or pains, good. Anyone here feel healthy and fit and ready to take on the world all the time? Probably not. Anyone here ever feel weak or tired? Feel like, I'm done? Let's let somebody else do all the hard work. So I was over at Harrowwood on Wednesday, and I preached this sermon. I drove it over there, and I asked them this question. I said, well, think about where I am. I'm at Harrowwood, right? And you know, people are kind of in a different chapter of their lives there. I said, so does the fact that you're really old let you off the hook? Does the fact that you're old and retired and you might have physical challenges, does that mean you don't have to do anything? And they said, no, that doesn't let us off the hook. I said, if you're tired and retired, does that mean you're done? They said, no. And they knew I was going to come back and say all that to you today. We can still make choices about what we do with our time, with our energy, with how we invest our minds, our hearts, what we do with our bodies. Maybe we're not going to carve a big road through a mountain, but there might be something for us to do that feels almost as hard and is for us to do. How do we invest ourselves in our living? What kind of godding do we do to make God a verb in the world? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We can work with what we got. We can be kind to people we encounter. We can be generous in spirit. We can be gentle. We can be helpful. We can be like Dashrath and use what we have to be a blessing to others. And if we do that, people will get a glimpse of God in how we're living. Amen.